This 13-year-old MacBook Pro needs some help, and I'm going to help it out by turning it into a 40-year-old computer. Hey everybody, it's Chris from FamilyGeekery, and today we've got ourselves this 2010 MacBook Pro 13-inch, and I featured this recently on the last video I did about MacBook Pro and MacBook batteries, and the batteries going bad and how to fix them. And if you watch that video, I mentioned that this battery was suspected bad, and it had told me it was bad, but then it started telling me that it was good again. But, well, now it's back to telling me it's bad again, so I was right. It says it needs service. It's showing that it's only got like 2,000 milliamp hour max, and we're gonna take care of that. But while we're at it, we're gonna do a couple other things to this computer. So if you've been following the channel for a while, you know that I've got this theory about the difference between can you upgrade a computer and should you upgrade a computer. And in this case, you got to kind of see what you're starting with and see what it's going to take to get it to that next level, and find out a plan for it. So in this case, we got a 2010 MacBook Pro, which, like I said, is 13 years old. And if we look at some of the specs here, it's showing a 2.4 gigahertz Intel Core 2 Duo processor, which some people would laugh at in today's computers, but really it's not that bad of a processor. It was really nice at the time. And I've had a lot of these computers that had this 2 gigahertz to 2.4 gigahertz range of these Core 2 Duos. It's showing 4 gigs of RAM, and as far as storage, it's got a 250 gigabyte SATA drive. So that's what we're starting with. So like I said, you have to figure out, should you even do anything to it, or should you just let this thing go out to pasture? So when I got my hands on this, if you remember from the other video, a friend of mine just actually gave me 2 old laptops that he had that he said they're just sitting on the shelf doing nothing. Can you do something with them? And I said, sure, I'll take a look at them. And this is one of the 2. So it cost me absolutely nothing. So it was a free computer. So starting from free, then the next step is, what in the heck do I even want to do with it, right? I've certainly got better computers than this. I'm not hurting for computers, so this isn't the type of computer that I would fix up and try to sell to somebody. At this point, you got to kind of figure out what you want to do with it. So after a little bit of soul searching, I actually came up with a plan for this one. So this is going to be dedicated to a certain cause. So I'll explain that a little bit later. First thing we need to do is get it ready. So obviously the first thing we need to do is get this battery out of here and dispose of it properly. So I've ordered up a new battery and I got that one in. And while we're at it, while we open it up, I'm going to go ahead and max this thing out, or not max it out, but I'm going to at least give it 8 gigs. For what I want to do with it, 4 would be fine, but the 8 gig upgrade was relatively cheap, so I went ahead and bought that. You got to remember, I'm also starting from $0, so throwing a couple dollars at this thing for a fun project isn't the end of the world. And then while I'm in there, I'm going to get rid of this 250 gig spinning drive, and I'm going to put in a small SSD that I had lying around. So that cost me $0 also. So here's all of our parts. We got the battery here, which is actually a 65 watt hour, 6,000 milliamp hour battery. So that should give us plenty of life. Here's our little SSD here. That's a 2.5 inch SATA SSD, and it's 120 gigabytes, which you may be saying to yourself, Chris, that's smaller than what you're starting with. Well, I don't care how big it is for this particular project. I do want it to be fast though, so it's going to boot up fast, it's going to run smooth, programs are going to pop right open, so having that SSD is going to be definitely worth it. And then here's our 8 gigs of RAM. Now, a little bit of backstory. I did have some RAM sitting around. I've always got a bunch of these chips from different iMacs and different things. And I had these guys here, which was a matching pair of 2 4 gigabyte chips. Now these came out of I think a newer MacBook Pro, but they're still DDR3. And typically speaking, if you have the right generation but the wrong speed, as long as it's a matching pair, you should be fine. Now that's typically speaking, and in this case I actually learned something. This particular set did not work in the MacBook because it is PC3L, which is a lower voltage. So this MacBook is a little bit older, so it needs the 1.5 volts, which in this case this is 1.5 volt memory, and I think the lower voltage is like 1.2 or 1.3 volts, so that's why it didn't work. So we'll save that for another newer MacBook if we ever get one, and we'll go ahead and use these guys here. Alright, so I shut down the computer, flipped it over, and to get this job done we're going to need a 00 Phillips head, and we're going to need like a tri-wing, like a Y0 screwdriver. And this battery kit, the kit that came with the battery, is actually the nicest one I've ever bought. It came with a full set of MacBook screws in case you lose one in the process. It came with a little spudger. And it did come with a couple screwdrivers, the two screwdrivers that you're going to need. And usually I just toss these, but these are actually a little bit nicer quality than ones I've gotten in the past. So I may keep those around. But I'm definitely going to use my trusty Strabetto that has every single bit you could ever want. So I went ahead and took all the screws out, and we're ready to open this thing up. And yes, if you're wondering, I did put all the screws in my fancy little magnetic thing that comes with the bit kit. Alright, so obviously here's the battery right here in front, and it's held in with two screws here, which are the tri-point. The bit that I've got is a tri-point 2.0 or Y 2.0, and I think they use these tri-points just as a precaution so that not just anybody grabs their screwdriver and starts messing with the battery. They don't care about the case itself and the hard drive. That's why they use little Phillips on those. And then another thing you'll notice is sometimes on the old batteries, part of this little plastic thing here will break. So if you do have a broken one like this one, then when you take the battery out, you may just look around and see if you can find the little piece of black plastic and fish it out with some tweezers or something just to get it out of there so it doesn't rattle around. So we got the two screws taken out. We just need to take this connector off here. So I'm going to use their little spudger since I had it handy. And we're just going to pry up a little bit and then pull that away from the main board. And then the last step is we've got this little sticker here, a little warning sticker that says, "Hey dummy, don't do anything if you don't know what you're doing." So we're just going to peel that up a little bit, and then we're ready to take this guy right out. Alright, so we're going to leave that battery out while we work on the rest of it. So the next step is going to be taking the old memory out. So we got these two 2 gigabyte chips in here. We're just going to spread these little plastic wings here apart, and they should just kind of spring up a little bit, and then you're just going to wiggle them loose. And then for the bottom one, you're going to spread them apart again. Sometimes it gets halfway and it hits your fingers, and then you try to kind of spread them again, and it's going to pop right up. So with the old ones out, we can put the new ones in. You just want to look for the offset here and match it up with the offset on your RAM chip. And we're going to put the bottom one in, couple degree angle as we bring it down in there, and then you want to kind of make sure that it's pushed all the way into the slot and then push it down past these ears. And the same thing with the top one. We're going to put it in at a slight angle, make sure both sides are flush all the way in there, and then push it down. And that's the RAM. Alright, now time for the hard drive. So to take the hard drive out, we've got a little black plastic bracket that goes right across here that's held down by 2 screws. So we've gone back to the Phillips head bit for this. So let's take those 2 screws up. And if I'm lucky, I get them to come all the way up but stay captive in there. And then I just kind of lift the whole thing out so that the screws stay with it. There's a little bit of tape here. A little bit of tape holding that down. So we'll just set that aside with the screws still in place. And now we get the little plastic tab here. It's going to let us lift it up, and it's held down by a couple studs down into this side right here. But when we lift it up, be careful because we've got the SATA connector here that's just a little ribbon cable, and it's not going to want to go very far. So I'm going to lift it up just enough to get it out, and then I'm going to wiggle that SATA connector in it and just let that rest in there. So this has 4 studs and the side screw holes, and we're going to need a T6 bit for that. So our kit here has a T6 bit. So I'm going to go ahead and take these screws off, transfer them onto our new SSD, and I'll be back when we're done with that. Okay, so I took the 4 studs out of the old hard drive, put them into the new hard drive. Now we're ready to mount this in here. So just like we took it off, we're going to put this ribbon cable back on, taking care not to stretch it away from the chassis too much. And then we've got these 2 little mount points here that have the holes for the studs in them, so we're just going to kind of put this in at an angle, and those will line up, and then it just kind of lies down flat. And it's got some kind of shock absorber mechanism to it. That's because the drive that came out of it, of course, was a spinning drive, and you don't want the spinning drive getting bumped around too much on a laptop. With the SSD, we don't care about that anymore. So once that's in there, we can put the little plastic bracket back down on there. And put our Phillips screwdriver back on. We can mount these screws back down in there. And depending on what kind of drive you use, there may be a width difference or depth difference between the 2 drives. Since this one doesn't matter if it shakes around a little bit, it really doesn't matter. It feels like this one's pretty solid. If there's any play in yours, you can always put something underneath it just to give it a little bit extra cushion, to give it a little bit extra height. But you're pretty safe since it's an SSD drive. Alright, so the last step before we close this up is to get the new battery in. So we're going to angle this battery forward a little bit. Just kind of slide it in past these mounting holes for the back plate. And then just let it sit right down in there. Okay, now when I took the screws out, on mine the longer screw is on the right side, the shorter screw is on the left side. So we're going to put the tri-point bit back in, and then get these screws mounted down. Then once we get those mounted down in there, then we can connect the battery cable back. And then we're good to go. And this guy will just sit down once we put the lid back on. So let's get the battery hooked back up. And she's all done. Let's close her up, and then we'll talk about how we have to get macOS back on there. Alright, so I got to put it back together and flip back over. And in case you were wondering, yes, I did get the little black piece of plastic out, so that's not going to rattle around inside there. So now we got a brand new hard drive in there, and we need to get macOS on there. So we have a couple options on that, and I've done videos on both. You can either use a thumb drive and do that, so I'll put a link in the description below on how to use a thumb drive to install macOS, or you can do a install from over the internet, which is what I usually do. So I'll put a link also to a video where I did that for a 2011 MacBook, and it would be the same exact process. So I'm going to go ahead and get macOS running on this hard drive here, and then I'll be back when I'm done. Alright, we got macOS all installed, and you can see I've got the charger plugged in. It is showing orange, so that's a good sign that it is charging the battery. The battery did come with a little instruction book that gives you instructions on how to fully charge and discharge the battery. It says about 4 or 5 times in a row before you start using it normally. That's just to calibrate the capacity of the battery with the capacity of what the Apple thinks that your battery can hold. So let's go ahead and look at all of our specs here to see what we're able to do. So we got it installed all the way up to macOS High Sierra. That is the highest operating system that this computer can handle. And I will admit that running this newer software on this older laptop, it is a little sluggish in some points, but overall it's going to do what we need it to do. And you can see we've got our 8 gigs installed here. That went smooth. And we've got our 120 gigabyte SSD drive on here. So everything's working good. Let's go ahead and go back over here, check in the system report, and we'll check out that battery. And it is showing that the full charge capacity should be a little over 6,000 milliamp hours. So that's a lot better than the one that was bad that was saying 2,000. And that's even much better than the one that we did on the previous video where we had one that was saying that the maximum capacity was 300 milliamp hours. So it's only showing a cycle count of 2, so that says it's a brand new battery pretty much. So we're going to go ahead and let this charge all the way up, and I'm going to go through the discharge cycle a couple times just to calibrate that out. But everything looks good. So the only thing left to do is to let you know what I came up with for a use for this computer, and I think it is now apparent what that is. So I've decided to make this 13-year-old MacBook Pro turn into a 40-year-old Apple II computer. So growing up I had an Apple IIc. In fact, I still have an Apple II and I still have all of my discs. It's just I don't have the space to turn it on and plug it up and hook it up to a monitor, and I just don't have the time to set all that up and space to set it up. I still want to play the games though, so having an emulator built onto this Mac as a dedicated machine will give me an opportunity to play some of my old favorite games and share those with the rest of the family. So I think you can see now why the 120 gigabyte drive was going to be more than enough. The entire collection of all Apple software put together is a little over 200, about 240 megabytes. That's megabytes with an M. So you could literally put the entire Apple catalog on this computer about 500 times. And that's obviously not necessary. Nobody needs that. So let me show you now what we're going to be using to make that into a reality. And that is a program called Virtual 2. And Virtual 2 is made by a guy named Gerard Putter. And I've tested out a couple different emulators over the years. This is the one that's consistently the highest quality, and he puts the most care into it. So feature-wise, it's got everything you could ever want. So I've got it running down here. Let me just minimize this. And here is an Apple II emulator. So let me go into full screen. And unfreeze it. And now this is running just like an Apple II would, and what's even awesome about this is when it's loading games up, you can actually hear coming out the speakers the sound of the old disk drive, the old 5 1/4 floppy drive. So this is Karateka running on an old Apple II, and this will emulate Apple II, Apple IIc, Apple II Plus, Apple IIe. And it's It's just awesome to be able to see this. So to wrap this video up, let's summarize what we did. We took a free laptop, added a free hard drive, or at least a hard drive that I had sitting around, got some new RAM and a new battery in it, got it all reinstalled with a brand new operating system, and got a Apple emulator running on there, Virtual 2. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. So next step is I'm going to take some of my old games. I still have my old Apple II games like this gold box Pool of Radiance, and I'm going to load up some of the discs onto the hard drive here and start going down memory lane. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and give me that thumbs up, give me a like. If this is the kind of stuff that you like to see and you want to see more, go ahead and hit subscribe. And make sure you check out the Family Geekery Podcast. New episodes every Tuesday. Me and my daughters talk about everything from movies to comic books to computer games to video games to everything. And you can check that out anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. So thanks again for watching, and until next time, peace out and geek out.